Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Workplace Safety North and the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development webinar on safe use and storage of explosives. My name is Paige Splain, and I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for speaker questions. Questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box, and we'll do our best to help you. Please note, this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording, a copy of the presentation, and resource information will be sent to you within a few days. Before we begin, WSN and the ministry would like to ask a few questions to better understand what you may already know about today's topic. This will help us understand the usefulness of this webinar and get feedback on its effectiveness in helping businesses address health and safety issues in the workplace and prepare for future inspections. This information will be used to improve future webinars and awareness initiatives. So you should be seeing the poll on your screen. Please go ahead and answer those 8 questions. No identifying information will be collected or asked for, and all responses will be completely anonymous. WSN will be providing the ministry with the survey results, and the ministry will not receive any of your personal information. Your responses are confidential, and results will only be analyzed in aggregate form. This survey is completely voluntary and will not impact the likelihood of being inspected by a ministry health and safety inspector. So I'll just give everyone a few moments to finish that survey before we introduce our speakers. Perfect. So I'm just going to let this poll run for a moment, but I would like to introduce our presenters for today. So today we are joined by Kyle Watson of the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, and Philip Derige of Workplace Safety North. I'll invite Philip on screen to start today's presentation.
Morning, everyone. My name is Philip Derige. I am the Senior Specialist Ground Control for Workplace Safety North, and I will give you a brief introduction of what's going to be coming up this morning as far as this webinar is concerned. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today is a brief introduction will be provided, and Kyle will be talking about what will be the focus of the initiative as far as the MLITSD is concerned, what the inspectors will be looking for during the Blitz or the initiative. And then everything will be based on legislative requirements, and then will be provided some MLITSD resources, and then WSN will talk about some of the federal and Ontario requirements, a little bit of overlapping between the MLITSD presentation and what we'll be presenting, and ours will will mostly be on the like developing a questionnaire or a checklist, so to speak, with that. Having said that, we'll go for a Q&A at the end of it. Next slide, please. The initiative overview is composed of the following. The Ministry of Labor will be reviewing training, knowledges, and experiences of all personnel that are associated with dealing with explosive in your operation. They will be reviewing programs as far as how explosive storage and handling are evaluated, and they will also be looking at what are the risk assessment processes that were done with regards to addressing any hazards that are associated with storage and handling of explosive. And then the other thing that is they're looking for is, they call it the performance indicator, as far as how effective the mine policies and procedures as far as programs concerned. And then they will be conducting observation of how stories are being conducted at the workplaces. And then the other one is review warning signs and other safeguards that are associated with storage and handling of explosives. Having said that, I would like to give you Kyle to give the presentation for the MLITSD.
Perfect. Thank you, Philip. that introduction. Again, everyone, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here this morning to provide some information on the storage, use, and handling of explosives in underground mines. I'm a provincial mining specialist with the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. As you'll notice that probably doesn't sound familiar to everyone, but after the recent election, the new name of the ministry is now inclusive with immigration in it. So it's a longer acronym for us to use, but definitely a bigger portfolio for us. So with me here today, beside me, you won't see him on the screen, but is my fellow specialist, Scott Secord. So he's with me just to let you know. So if there's anything that comes up that either one of us can answer, we'll be happy to do that. So the initiative that's going to be started in the beginning of August is going to run in 2 phases. So the first phase is what starts today actually and runs to the end of September, and that's the education, outreach, and awareness phase. And compliance support with Workplace Safety North, and that's why Philip's here. He's got a great presentation for you today. The second part of the initiative is the inspection. Well, it's called Blitz, but the initiative itself, and that runs from August 1st to the end of September, and that's where you'll see inspectors in your workplaces auditing for compliance. As in all webinars, there's a disclaimer that our ministry puts forward, and that basically is that the presentation is to assist the workplace parties in understand their obligations under the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. So it's meant as information, and that if further interpretation is needed, that you consult with your own legal counsel to. If you need further clarification on what the intent of the regulation is, or what your thoughts or the intent of the regulation are, then we suggest that you consult your legal counsel. The Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development inspectors will apply and enforce the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulations based on the facts that they may find in your workplace. So this presentation does not affect their enforcement direction in any way. So just a disclaimer that we need to read out. But so what we'd like to get across today is why, the overview is why the MLITSD is conducting this explosive initiative, and what to expect during the inspections when the inspectors come into your workplaces. Areas of focus and key priorities, and obviously leave you with some resources that you'll take back to be able to look up if there's any assistance needed in understanding the regulations or your obligations under this initiative. So why is the ministry conducting an explosive initiative? Where explosives are used, the potential for serious or fatal injury as well as significant property damage is always present. The safe use of explosive requires that explosives are only used for their intended and designed purpose. So very important to remember that. Workers must be properly trained before being assigned to use or handle explosives. And we'll talk a bit more about that later, but the Common Core requirements under Section 11 of 854, that's where that comes in. Explosives must be securely stored or accounted for at all times. Big issue today, and that definitely will be talked about at quite length as well today as well. And the inspector feedback has indicated the need for a concerted review in the field practices of explosives storage and handling, and that's simply because it's such, explosives can be hazardous if not dealt with properly, and definitely something that the inspector has brought back just to bring it to the forefront for everyone. So what to expect when an inspector arrives during an inspection? So while this presentation will reference specific sections of Regulation 854, which serve to highlight key focus areas for the safe storage and use and handling of explosive initiative, employers are reminded that all regulatory requirements in 854, and that's in Part 6 of the explosive section, in the regulation, and that runs from section 121 right through to 154. So all of those sections require compliance. We won't be going through every one of those sections today, but just a reminder that obviously all of the sections in the explosive section require compliance. So during the initiative, the inspectors will check for compliance with these regulations, as well as any other applicable regulatory provisions, such as the inclusion of the use of the explosives in your site risk assessment. So that's obviously found in sections 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 of Regulation 854, the risk assessment section. In addition to the Reg 854, the inspectors will also check for compliance with requirements as set out in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, such as the requirements for training, procedures, and supervision. So that's in section like 25(2)A of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we'll get into it. We'll start talking about requirements related to surface magazines. The magazines located on surface. So one of the key highlights that we'd like to get through in this slide is that in section 123, which deals with explosive magazines on surface, explosives kept or stored on the surface shall be kept or stored in compliance with the Explosives Act of Canada and its regulations under that act. So the number 2, if a magazine is required, it shall A, be constructed in conformity with the Storage Standards of Industrial Explosives, May 2001, published by the Explosive Regulatory Division, ERD, of Natural Resources Canada. So one of the key things that we wanted to note out of this is that storage standard for industrial explosives is now been redacted and is now been replaced with the storage standard for industrial explosives referred to. So that new standard is now the CAN BNQ 2910-500, which is called Magazines for Industrial Explosives. So that's where you'll find the information related to for surface magazines. And then there's also another standard called CAN BNQ 29-510, and that deals with the explosive quantity distances. So and that's where you'll find the reference material dealing with that. So for federal magazines and equipment, effective security procedures designed to control access to magazines and their contents are essential to mitigate the risk of explosion or losses due to improper handling or theft. So the magazines used to store the explosives should meet the following requirements. So obviously to protect against weather conditions, so it's very important. Also the protection against physical damage. Fire protection is a big thing, so make sure that there's fire breaks in there. Protection against theft and protection from the effects of explosions occurring in adjacent magazines. So obviously this is, you don't want to set up your you don't want to put your magazine right beside your I don't know, your bunkhouse or something, right? Obviously that's not something you want to do. And again, these requirements are set out in the BNQ standard for industrial explosives, the 2910-500. And you're going to be provided with links to all this in your resource section. So for the quantity distance principles, so explosive quantity distance can be found in the BNQ 2910-500, and that the standard establishes a minimum separation distance to be used between potential explosion sites, and they call that the PES, and exposed sites, the ES, to reduce the risk to life and property, right? So it gives those distances and in accordance to the explosives that you have on site. Applies to all locations in which the quantity of manufactured explosives are stored. So that's all listed in there and provides you with those details in that standard. Switching to the requirements related to underground explosive storage. So explosives, so we're going to talk about magazines and temporary storages. So explosives stored underground must be stored in magazines or suitable container at locations removed from drilling and blasting operations where quantities are less than 160 kilograms. So mines will ensure all locations, including temporary storages, are identified on mine plans, very important, and that the mine will ensure there are procedures for storage areas that are not magazines. And these will all be found in section 125 of 854. Suitable storage locations for underground explosive storage and magazines must be located 60 meters from the main access, key mechanical or electrical installations, refuge or other gathering areas, from fuel or flammable storages, and protect against vehicle impact. And obviously very important that all these storage locations must be marked clearly with a danger explosive sign. And again, requirements will be found in section 126. In section 128, you'll find that all magazines and storages must ensure dry conditions, good housekeeping, and proper disposal of packaging and wrappings. So this is a big one that you have to ensure that your storages underground, your magazines are kept clean and dry. Very, very important. And it looks a lot better. It's in the regulation, but it's important that stays like that, and important that workers don't just dump explosives over or disregard the stuff that's in the back. Like it has to all be taken care of, and very, very important that it's kept clean and dry. Inventory controls. So again, the oldest explosive that is not defective within the magazine are used first. So continuously rotating stock is very important. You'll find these requirements in section 128. And explosives that is unattended shall not be left in or about any working place, but shall be returned to storage, right? And again, section 128 covers that. As well as detonators and cap fuse shall be stored in separate suitable closed storage containers located at least 8 meters from any other explosive. And weekly inspection reports and magazine logbooks are completed under the control of a competent person. So that's key right there to ensuring that your storages and your magazines are kept in pristine condition. Moving to the explosive disposal. So written procedures have been established for the safe disposal of damaged explosives. Again, you'll find that in section 128. And in the Occupational Health and Safety Act under 25(2)A, that procedures for the safe disposal of damaged explosives are communicated to workers. Explosive handling. Procedures for this for safe handling of explosive products have been developed. So again, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act under 25(2)A, the workers are assigned to transport and handle explosives, have been trained in the explosive handling procedure. Very important that that workers are trained, need to know what the procedures are, how to do them, and that they're competent in those measures. Workers have the appropriate Common Core specialty modules, so a big one, right? And you'll find this in section 11, and that's for the handling and using of explosives. So the Common Core modules cover those components, and that they need to be signed off on those. Precautions and procedures for transporting explosives with mobile equipment or shaft conveyance are communicated and enforced, and you'll find those requirements in section 133. Section 134 covers explosives are removed without delay from the shaft stations or other underground entrances to the magazine, or use locations by to the safest, most direct route, right? So when the explosives arrive underground at the shaft station, they need to be moved to the magazine ASAP without delay, right? So they can't just sit there. They need to go in the most direct route and as quickly as possible. Explosive transportation. So this slide's a little bit, there's a lot of information on it. It covers both the surface and underground transportation for explosives. So, mobile equipment will be kept in sound mechanical condition, be conspicuously marked by red signals or flags easily visible from the front, rear, or both sides. And that's a surface requirement there. They have all metal parts that could come in contact with containers of explosives covered with wood, tarpaulin, or other similar non-sparking material. And again, it does apply to, it's written in the surface in 131, but it does apply to underground as well in certain modifications. Not to be used to transport other goods or materials at the same time as explosives are being transported. Be equipped with a BC type fire extinguisher, right? Just in case, for sure. Not be loaded in excess of its rated carrying capacity. Have explosives stored or fastened so as not to prevent any part of the load from becoming dislodged. You don't want your explosives to be falling off or missing some, or part of it to be tipping over. That's got to be properly secured. Transport detonators with other explosives only if the detonators are in a suitable container, in a separate compartment, and if there are 5,000 or less in number. And obviously we need to be attended at all times and carry only those persons necessary for handling explosives. So on those vehicles, you can't be taking passengers with you unless that person is there to help you unload or manage those explosives. The last two here are specific to underground: travel less than 10 kilometers per hour and have the designated right of way, right? So we talked about that. We want those explosives to go directly to the magazine once they arrive underground in the most direct way. And you'll find those requirements in sections 131, 132, and 135. Bulk explosive handling for mobile equipment underground. So a bulk explosive vehicle shall be provided with a fire suppression system that uses sprinklers, foam, or other suitable means to suppress the fire. These vehicles shall be parked in suitable places designated as a safe parking place identified in the mine plans when not in use, and shall not be parked in a magazine. This is a big one. You never want to park a bulk explosive vehicle in a magazine. And that there are procedures for the inspection and cleaning frequency of explosive vehicle equipment prior to servicing or repair. So obviously you'd never want to bring that bulk explosive equipment into a garage for repairs, not having properly been cleaned according to the procedures that are in place in conjunction with joint health and safety or health and safety representatives, right? That's been prepared by that. So the reporting requirements to the MLITSD. So the employers have been and will continue to report to the ministry any occurrence or careless placing or handling of explosives as required. So that's found in section 122 sub 3 of 854. The employers are submitting the required notice of use or storage annually or prior to use as appropriate. So that notice is found in section 123 sub 4, and that the employers have been and will continue to report to the ministry any occurrence or defective explosive products as required. And that's in the newer regulation 420, and that it can be found in section 4 of that of 420 that sets out the prescribed reporting requirements for what is required under section 53 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So risk assessments. Regulation 854 requires all employers to conduct risk assessments on their workplace for the purpose of identifying, assessing, and managing hazards and potential hazards that may expose a worker to injury or illness. The risk assessment requirements are outlined in section 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 of Regulation 854. So under these provisions, an employer must develop and maintain, in consultation with the Joint Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety Representative, if any, measures to eliminate where practicable or to control where the elimination is impracticable, the hazards and potential hazards identified in the risk assessment. These would include any measures the employer has put into place to mitigate these risks associated with the storage, handling, and use of explosives. So ultimately, the results of the risk assessment should be considered in the development of the measures and to protect the health and safety of workers. So that's the ultimate goal. So you need to include into your risk assessment your procedures for the storage, use, and handling of explosives. And obviously, like I promised before, resource material will be listed as well. I know there's more to come from Philip, but there's some resource material that will bring you right to the regulations. And then always keep in mind that the most current versions of either the occupational health safety or regulations, or any regulation for that matter in Ontario, are found on e-laws, and you'll always find the most current. So if if you're a computer guy and you don't like to use the green book as much as I do, then you can easily search that on e-laws, and you'll always find the most latest versions. And again, it included the final report for the mining health and safety prevention review that occurred back in 2014. So it's always good measure to be reviewing that, as well as to see what the most relevant hazards were at the time, right? Relevant, and again, both the standard for the magazines and stores, magazines on surface for the BNQ standards are there as well. And also included the risk assessment guideline that's found on ontario.ca. So if there are any questions on how to go through the risk assessment or how to do that, it's very well listed into the guideline, and it'll give you definitely some help in that area. And I think for me, that concludes my portion, if I'm not mistaken. And I think I'll hand it back to Philip.
Philip, you'll just need to unmute and turn on your camera.
Thank you for that very elaborate presentation that you have provided, Kyle. For me, I would like to start with showing you this infographic as far as injuries or statistics concerned in 2021. So there was one fatal injury. It wasn't related at all to explosive. That occurred back in traumatic fatal back in 2021. Is the injury of a worker result of a run of material. So what I'm going to do going forward is just some developing a checklist as far as what Kyle have already been mentioned, and go forward with, and probably provide some elaboration in areas. And I would like to elude some of the overlapping of information that's already been provided by Kyle. Next slide, please. So as far as construction inspection of surface magazines is concerned, the question that you would ask is, are explosive and detonation magazines on surface been designed and constructed in compliance with relevant legislation? And Kyle have already mentioned this one. With regards to proper engineering standard, you're looking at federal requirements. This is under the Explosive Act of Canada. And then you have the construction should meet requirements under explosive magazines for industrial explosive, which is been mentioned, CAN BNQ 2910-500 of 2015. It has been revised in 2022. And it also should conform with the National Building Standard, National Code of Canada. As far as location of surface magazines is concerned, it should comply with the requirements as far as explosive quantity and distances under CAN BNQ 2910-510. Again, it's revised in 2022. So these are pretty much new as far as the national standards concerned. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at surface magazines, physical inspection by competent person is required. So some of the requirements as far as this one's concerned is notices and licenses. Of course, you're dealing with explosives, so you need to have those licenses and notices in place. And the other one is capacities and quantities. Again, that all depends on the type of explosive magazine that you are using. So there is type 1, type 4, type 9, and type 12. There are actually more to that back in the days, but with the new regulation or amendments in regulation or standards, it came down to type 1, type 2. And this, you can find them under the Magazine for Industrial Explosives Standard of Canada, is the CAN BNQ 2910-500 of 2015, or revised in 2022. So again, it was mentioned by Kyle that security, housekeeping, signage, and most importantly, stock rotation. Now, for those who are doing inspection of magazines, they have to make sure that the newer ones should be inside and the older ones should be outside. If you, most of the time, I've seen a lot of workers who just goes into a magazine or into a storage area, they pick up what's close to the door. So in order for that stock rotation to really happen, is to make sure that those older stocks of explosives should be closer to the door, because that's always been the case as far as. And the other one is sources of initiation. And most of the time you're looking at electrical hazards. And there are also, you can add in here, because we are using electronic detonators, the effect of having radio frequency, phones, and everything like that. It should not be used around those areas as far as is concerned. And then the compatibility of products. We use different types of explosive. And the reason why I know this, because when I was at Queen's University, I used to manage the test site for the university, and we were using different explosives, and it can happen into mines wherein they do testing of new explosive for improving fragmentation and everything. So make sure that you have that compatibility of products that are stored on those areas. The other one is, they call it the TACN development. The TACN is actually a condition wherein the explosive, which is mostly ammonia, the emulsion and slurry are still ammonia in different form. They're not prills. But then again, once they start to moist and there is a process of copper in the storage area, there is also a tendency wherein TACN can develop because of that. The next slide, please. So the other, in underground explosives, the same thing. It was also already mentioned by Kyle as far as this was concerned. The construction should be in compliance with Regulation 854 as far as the location is concerned. The other thing here is we have two different types of accessories. You have the explosive and you have your detonators. They should not be stored at the same place or same storage. As mentioned by Kyle, we should have a minimum of 8 meters between those storage areas as far as storage is concerned. Kyle already mentioned this one, that any explosive magazines or cap magazines, construction should be located minimum 60 meters away from what have been mentioned earlier: main accesses, key mechanical, electrical installation, fuse station, and you can add future development. It should not be close to these areas. And certainly you have to make sure that it's accessible, right? And there should be what we call signage as far as those ones concerned. Next slide, please. So conditions of magazines, as mentioned by Kyle, is so important as far as housekeeping is concerned. So you have to make sure that housekeeping is always done within the magazines. So make sure that there are no incidents of people picking up explosive when they slip. The other one is signage, and I mentioned earlier about hazards as far as electrical is concerned, and because we don't want inadvertent initiation of explosive or detonators around the area that could actually result to a larger catastrophic event. So ventilation is so important as far as magazines is concerned, because you don't want noise to be happening within those explosives, because certainly it will compromise the explosive. Again, I mentioned the TACN. The way it should the magazine should be constructed should avoid the use of copper metals within the alloys. Right. The other one is quantity of explosives stored. Again, if you look at this one, you're looking at the standards as far as regulation 854 as far as capacity quantity is concerned, and the way you should be storing them is the detonators and explosives should be stored separately, as I mentioned before. The other one that is very important as far as quantity and of detonators and explosive is records of those ones that should be kept within a 6 months period. Next slide, please. So protection of sources of ignition is very important, as mentioned by Kyle. So you have to make sure that storage in areas designated, built, and appropriate standard and should be within appropriate standards, ensuring all sources of possible inadvertent initiation have been identified, and that includes the use of radio frequency, cell phones. You know, we have Wi-Fi's underground now, so and we are using a lot, especially for production blasting. We're using electronic detonators that could be inadvertently initiated by electronic devices that we are using underground. Next slide, please. So inspection is so important. As required by Regulation 854, there is a requirement for operations to do weekly inspections and making sure that those records are in place and kept within 6 months. All right. So you have to make sure that you develop checklists that should be used for inspection so that you won't miss anything. There's no difference between doing our walk around in an equipment before we drive them. So it's the same thing with what we should be doing as far as magazines concerned, that we have a checklist, make sure that everything that are important are covered. The other one is our deficiencies recorded and corrected in a timely fashion. And the other one is there a classification system as far as deficiency is concerned? Now, this one is for underground, and surface mines are covered under federal regulations such as Explosive Act of Canada and explosive regulations. Now, are there special storage requirements for trial production? I mentioned this earlier because operations would always strive to get improvement as far as fragmentation is concerned. The other one is using explosives that are applicable for perimeter blasting. We do trials and everything like that. So we have to make sure that we have storage for those ones. It could still be within the storage for explosive, but then again, you have to separate them from the regular explosive that are being used for the operation. Is there a program in place to prevent unauthorized use of these trial products? We all know that there are, to my knowledge, there were no injuries that were associated with explosives over the last decade that I've known, but there are incidents that are associated with stolen explosive. One of the reasons why it didn't happen here happened in Regina, that more than 200 kilograms of explosive was stolen from a business. So it could happen in a workplace if we don't do proper way of inspection, making sure that we have our records, stock rotation, and everything like that. Next slide, please. So inventory and control, explosive products and equipment, as mentioned by Kyle, you have to make sure that you have the inventory as far as handling and transporting explosive. The other one, we do use bulk explosive underground, so we do use equipment for loading. So those are included as equipment is concerned. So is there an inventory of all of this equipment used for transporting detonators and explosive products? And it was mentioned by Kyle earlier that you don't want to transport detonators and explosive together, not unless they are in separate, the detonators are actually in a separate container. Is there a formal procurement policy for purchases as far as explosive concerns? Because We technical people would specify the specifications for us equipment, explosive, and everything that is required, and procurement should comply with it. Our records kept for explosive receive and use. The other one is when explosive products are received, our checks made to ensure purchases are basically in accordance with the specification that was provided. Have any issues with compatibility between new and existing products, especially when you are implementing different types of explosive for development, for production, specialty blasting, and everything like that. Make sure that you have those compatibility assessment between those. When establishing trials for explosive products, has formal risk assessment has been established, as mentioned by Kyle. That's basically part of section 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 of Regulation 854. Next slide, please. So have all personnel been made aware of that there is a testing being conducted in new products for efficiencies? And the other one is very, very important. There are cases where an explosive inside a hole can be blown out of the hole and then ended up in the mill. Our workers at the mill, security, maintenance personnel have been made aware of reporting or handling products that are inadvertently reach the milling operation or crushing operation. Next slide, please. So dispose of old and damaged explosive. I've been through this one when I was at Queens again, and there's a proper way of disposing them. But there are also type of explosive that you require to call Environment Canada to deal with it. And I've been through that before, and you have to make sure that is there a risk assessment being done on the hazards of disposing old and explosive and detonators. Has a procedure been developed regarding the safe disposal of damage of product? Is the standard procedure implemented and communicated to those who are dealing with explosive? Administration has an important role as far as storage and handling explosives is concerned. This requires the involvement of our Joint Health and Safety Committee, as mentioned by Kyle earlier, as far as the developing of a program on explosive handling and storage and handling is concerned. Our explosive magazines in control of a competent person. Training is very, very important as far as this was concerned as well. Next slide, please. So maintenance of explosive related equipment. This was mentioned by Kyle. Like other equipment that we use underground, the equipment that we use for loading, transporting explosives should also be properly maintained. Is there a preventive maintenance program that are in place for this equipment? Has a procedure been developed for pre-inspection of equipment to be serviced on site or sent for additional repairs somewhere else? Is there a formal program in place to ensure all supplier notifications are shared with appropriate user and maintenance personnel? Right? Is there a formal maintenance program for central blast system? Well, we do use central blast system all the time these days. So making sure that the central blast system inspection and maintenance should be in place as well. Next one. Next slide, please. Transporting and handling are written procedures established for employees transporting explosives and materials, not just program for maintaining the equipment used, but there should be a procedure for transporting. And this was already mentioned by Kyle that no one should be inside the same equipment or for transporting explosive, rather on surface or in underground operation. Are written procedures established for guarding for blast. Although we do off-shift blasting, but there are also cases wherein we do secondary blasting underground. So it could be in chutes, could be in big chunks of broken rocks that we have to make sure that we reduce the sizes on surface or underground. Is there a written procedure for post-blast examination following all blasts? Right. So as part of our re-entry protocol, that's basically part of it. Next slide, please. Procedures is so important as far as dealing with explosives concerned, regardless if it's handling misfires and everything like that. Are written procedures for developed for surface blasting, like phase bends, for underground development phases, for secondary blasting, dealing with misfired holes. So there are cases where we have misfires in both surface and underground. There should be a procedure developed for those ones. And the other one is frozen holes, or they call it squeeze slashes. Welcome to, especially in underground mines at depth. We have high stress ground. Our holes are squeezing with low explosive. Most likely would be emulsion or slurry. These are sensitized explosive. We either use micro balloons or aerate them. So if you put them too long in a hole, over time, and there's a squeezing of the hole, you pop the micro balloons or get rid of the air that you use to sensitize it, it goes back to its unsensitized condition. So when you shoot it, we can monitor the number of cups that goes, but then again, the explosive column didn't go. Right? So that includes barricades, fly rocks, especially on surface blasting, remote drilling, especially when you're dealing with frozen holes. You have to make sure that you have what we call a procedure to do that. Construction projects, we do use sometimes explosive as well, and dealing with explosive in construction projects should have specific SOPs depending on the type of project that we're dealing with. Air traffic, when you're doing blasting on surface, you have to make sure that not just on the ground, but we have to make sure that the issues with air traffic is concerned. The other one is wind direction. Every time we do the blast, especially on surface, we create a lot of dust. Where's the direction of the dust and everything like that? We don't want that dust to be ending up on areas where residential are occurring. A very good example of this one is the Hollinger pit in Timmins. That's the reason why they raise the berms, because every time they do the blast, they don't want those dust to be going into the neighborhood. So it should be blown away a little bit farther. Next slide, please. Are written procedures established for secondary blasting in chutes, crushers for big materials that are there, passes or waste passes, hang-ups on grizzlies, if you're using grizzlies, draw points, oversized materials on inside the stopes, and the other one, storage bins. Next slide, please. Are written procedures established for blasting the vicinity of diamond drill holes. Right? So we all know that we have records of diamond drill holes. We know where the diamond drill holes are going based on records. There should be written procedures as far as this one is concerned. There are written standards established for controls and restrictions on the use of radio transmitters around detonators, especially when you're dealing with electronic detonators and if you are still using what we call electric detonators. Have workers been provided instruction on the dangers of handling explosive? Awareness training is always important. Not only those people or workers who are dealing with explosive, awareness training should also be provided to those who are working within the area. Is there a program established for monitoring of lightning and electrical storms, especially in surface? Not so much in underground, but in surface. Okay. Next slide, please. Training requirements, as mentioned by Kyle, is so important as far as dealing with stories and handling of explosive. Appropriate employees receive formal training involving the use of explosive materials, which includes your transporting of explosive, using loaders, bulk loading equipment, storage of explosive, loading of explosive on transporting equipment, and certainly inspection is concerned. And then on surface, fly rack is so important. Prevention of damage of surroundings, protection of blasters and site personnel. Is a refresher training provided to employees involved in handling and storage of explosive? Next slide, please. Have all personnel, public who may be at risk of exposure to danger or explosive been identified and trained in hazard identification related to explosive products, especially when you're having new workers or young workers, temporary contractual workers who are dealing with contractual products that we have on both surface and underground. Security should also be trained as far as this was concerned, as well as maintenance personnel, especially when they're dealing with equipment that are used for transporting and loading, bulk loading of explosives. Next slide, please. Emergency preparedness. We all know that there is a danger as far as explosive is concerned. Has an emergency preparedness risk assessment been completed, specifically looking for explosive and detonators, handling and transportation? Has the findings of this risk assessment been formalized in policies and procedures as at the sites, right? Again, this is related to 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 of the Regulation 54, developing a risk register as far as hazards associated with storage and handling of explosive should be in place as well. Have the workers, staff, emergency responders received training on emergency measures to be taken in case there is an associated fire, inadvertent explosion in underground operation? Location of fire extinguishers and instructions as per how these fire extinguishers should be used in case of explosive fire or inadvertent explosion should be in place. Has the emergency response plan been communicated to other responders like mutual aid agreements and others, including surface fire brigades that are around the area? Next slide, please. So in cases wherein there are issues with regards to explosive handling, transporting explosive, there is what we call investigation and reporting requirements, as mentioned by Kyle on this at the end of his presentation. Have standards been established to comply with explosive legislation requirements like notices, licenses, inspections, and signage? Are incidents involving explosive materials formally investigated? Right? We all know that there is always an investigation that happens regardless if it is just a stolen explosive or mishandling of explosive or whatnot. Is there a process to ensure that recommendations arising from any investigation are dealt with and basically within an established time frame? Are appropriate agencies notified when an incident occurs? Next slide, please. So is there a system in place to ensure identified deficiencies that were a result of investigation are corrected in a timely manner? This includes notices or licenses, non-compliant to legislative requirements, non-compliant to training requirements, non-compliant to any inspections, non-compliant to any transporting or explosive, and use of loading equipments, bulk loading equipments, blasting vicinity of diamond drill holes, and then the use of transmitters around detonators, incidents investigation in cases there are incidents that would happen in the workplace, storage requirements, so in both surface and underground, and then purchasing delivery of explosive underground. Well, the suppliers of fire explosives concerned, they have the proper way of transporting or the proper equipment of transporting explosive and detonators to an operations magazines, right? But when it gets into the operation transporting to an underground, is basically the the work that's done by the operations. So you need to have training as far as those people involved in transporting those explosives to underground magazines is concerned, we should have. Next slide, please. Is there a system to regularly report on reasons why deficiencies are not corrected in a timely manner? Okay. Is there a system to implement recommendations made in various program activities that includes investigation, formal training, requirements for refresher training if required, transporting explosives, and then engineering standards, because when you do blasting, you need to have engineering design involved. So modifications and everything like that. We all have those communication processes. If it is totally out of the plan, that has to be investigated why that's so and everything like that, and it has to be recorded. Next slide, please. Is there a system to regularly report on reasons why the Joint Health Safety Committee recommendations who are involved most of the time in investigation and implementation of programs are not being implemented? Are audits conducted of the explosive program element at least every 2 years or annually, part of the management of health and safety program? So there has to be a program element as far as audits or assessments of explosive. That includes your magazines, how you store them, how you transport them, and the loading process. Next slide, please. So this is the last part of my presentation, and these were already been provided by Kyle in his at the end of his presentation. So as far as information resources concerned, Explosive Act of Canada is a federal regulation that is being implemented, which is current since May 2022. And there is a link there if you want to get a copy of it. And then we have what we call the explosive regulation that was established back in 2013, was amended in 2018 and current until last month. And again, there is a link there if you would like to have a copy. Next slide, please. And last but not the least, we have the Explosive Standard of Canada, which is the CAN BNQ 2910. There's a link there. And then National Standard of Canada, which is the explosive quantity and distances, CAN BNQ 2910 510. And certainly Part 6 of the Regulation 855 covers the implementation or regulation that has to be adhered to as far as Ontario is concerned. That ends my presentation, and thank you very much for this opportunity to provide you all this information, as well as with Kyle's information.
Well, thank you, Philip and Kyle. Just as a reminder to our attendees, if you have any audience questions, please put them in the question and answer section, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. So before we move into audience questions or final thoughts, we would like to ask another set of questions to understand what you have learned today and to help us improve our webinars and future awareness initiatives. So I will launch the poll now. So you should be seeing the poll on your screen. Please go ahead and answer those 15 questions. So as with the previous survey, no identifying information will be collected or asked for, and all responses will be completely anonymous. WSN will be providing the ministry with the survey results, and the ministry will not receive any of your personal information. Your responses are confidential, and results will only be analyzed in aggregate form. This survey is completely voluntary and will not impact the likelihood of being inspected by a ministry health and safety inspector. So we'll give some time for you to answer those questions. So we do have some audience questions coming in, so I will invite Philip and Kyle back on screen. Okay, so the first question that we have is there templates available for organizations for documentations with explosive handling storage?
I will divert that question to Philip.
The checklist that I have provided in the presentation is pretty much the template that could be used. All you have to do is just develop it on a table, because those questions are already there. All you have to do is just migrate those, and we will be making this presentation available anyways posted on WSN website as a resource for everyone.
Okay, perfect. So just give a few more minutes for those poll questions. That is it that we have for audience questions. So maybe I'll turn it over to our speakers if they'd like to leave the audience with any final thoughts or comments just to wrap up the presentation.
Yeah, I'll go. It's Kyle here. I just want to thank everyone for joining in this webinar this morning. There's been a lot of information presented to the listeners, a lot of great information that will help you be in compliance with the initiative as it goes forward, and ultimately help make your workplaces safer. And that's the ultimate goal with this whole webinar and information provided to you. You may get visited by your friendly neighborhood mining inspector in the next couple of months. And just remember that the inspector is there to help and also answer questions. And you'll be provided with this copy of this presentation. My information is there as well. If there's anything that I could help with, any questions, then please send them my way, and I will get back to you.
Well, everything has been said by Kyle already, so I don't want to repeat it. But certainly, although we don't have any incidents as it relates to explosive, but we don't want to wait for that to happen. So making sure that we have a program in place as far as what has been presented is concerned would likely help us minimize those issues that can come out later as far as handling storage and handling explosives is concerned. So there are issues that came up, but before I've been searching for any incidents that are associated or injuries that were associated with explosive, but I cannot find anything that were over the last 10 years. So, but certainly there were incidents that were coming up with regards to stolen explosive that were taken out from underground. Investigations were going on, but why do we have to wait for an incident or an injury to happen before we do something else? So we might be better off to do what we call proactive implementation of programs, and this is what the Ministry of Labor is actually looking for, being proactive as far as developing programs concerned. And there are sections of regulations that we need to comply with. So those are basically the requirements that we have to make sure that we are complying with. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip and Kyle. So we don't have any more audience questions, so I think we can give some time back to our audience. Also, thank you for the audience for participating in those surveys. That is very helpful. So I'd just like to thank our attendees for attending the webinar regarding the Workplace Compliance Initiative on surface use and storage of explosives. As a reminder, a copy of the presentation and the recording will be emailed to participants within the next few days and posted to the resources page of workplacesafetynorth.ca. Thanks again and have a safe day.